All right, good evening, everybody. Wonderful to be here. We'll hit the ground running here. We are going to be picking up on your papers, I believe, on page 4 of lesson 1, and we're looking at reason 2. Now, before we get into that, would you pray with me? Father God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for all those that are here tonight. Help us to understand our faith a little bit better through this study. Help us to take these tools and use them, put them to use, not just so we can gather head knowledge, but so that we can actually gather what we need to go out and actually have conversations, meaningful conversations and relationships with those whom we contact. And Lord, we just ask that your word and would penetrate the hearts and minds of those that we talk to. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we're looking at reason 2 on page 4. Well, what are we talking about here? What reasons? And so the question is this: why is apologetics important? And so reason 1 was shaping culture. And so the main idea here is this: is when we share our faith, it's always against the backdrop of a certain culture. So a vivid example of this would be for someone who is in the mission field. Right? So if you step into the mission field and you go to share your faith, share the gospel with those in the mission field, then you have to take into account the culture to which you're entering, right? And that's extremely important because certain things and that which may be normal behaviors in a certain culture like ours may be highly offensive in another culture. You do that highly offensive thing, something as simple as not taking off your shoes, right? Then you've lost the battle. You've lost your audience. And so those are simple things like that. So we can extrapolate that or actually bring it back to our current culture and realize that whenever we share our faith, it's always against the backdrop of current culture, of circumstances. Every individual is part of a culture. And so they've been affected by it. Some would say infected by it. And so we always need to take into account that apologetics takes place, sharing the gospel takes place, always within the realm of culture. The gospel is never heard in isolation. It is always heard against the backdrop of the culture in which you've been born and raised. And it's also this idea of the fact that there is a culture war that is happening in our society as we speak. And so to understand that, and so we've spent a great deal of time in other classes and formats on our Sunday nights at the Southern Indiana Family Rally. It's the subject of what I'm getting to teach when we go to Hillsboro in September on Thursday nights, is this idea of understanding our culture so that we can work within it, combat it, and all that. That kind of hurt. Ouch. So the first reason was shaping the culture. So the second reason, and I think I just put the wrong paper away here. Yes. The second reason on our papers tonight that we're going to be looking at is strengthening believers. So why is apologetics important? Because of this concept of strengthening believers. And so this is extremely important. And I'll tell you this. For me, in my faith journey and my walk with Christ, I would say that apologetics has been extremely important in helping me to grow and to become more convinced, strengthened in my faith. There would have been a time when I was very, I don't know what's the right word to use. I was very passionate about my faith, but I don't know if I could have articulated so much. I could have articulated that it's true, but not so much why it's true. See, I could tell you this and this and this and this, but what are the underlying things about the why? And there was a certain point in time even though I was passionate about the that's, I didn't know a whole lot of whys. And now, not bragging, not trying to say, but now I feel very confident in understanding the whys. Why is it true? Why should we believe this? Why? And so that just, to me, and when we talk about this idea of strengthening believers, this is extremely important, especially since the way that our culture now, and in the church, I use the term loosely, in Christendom as a whole, the way that people come to faith and even in the Christian church and Church of Christ sometimes is through secondhand faith, which we'll talk about. It's through emotionalism that can even occur. And so we want to have a solid foundation. And so it's this idea of not just knowing what you believe, but also why you believe it. This dynamic prepares the Christian to share their faith with much confidence. And I would agree with that. So, on this subject of strengthening believers, we see this happen a lot of times. The author of this book that I'm reading from here is William Lane Craig, and he is an extremely brilliant philosopher. He doesn't get everything right, but on apologetics and things, he really has an excellent way of explaining things. He's very academic in the way that he writes and teaches. And so it's sometimes it's a little toothsome to get through. But in this book here, he talks about how many times he's invited to college campuses to debate. So when he does so, one of the results that comes of it is this idea of strengthening believers, is that he'll have students that come up to him following his debates, following his discussions, and they say things like that they cannot wait to go share their faith in Christ now that they've been given these understandings and so forth and so on. And so apologetics can be a powerful tool in helping us to strengthen our faith. Now, the second thing is this, that apologetics can also help you to keep the faith in times of doubt and struggle. So it can help you to keep the faith in times of doubt and struggle. Now, I don't know of anybody that doesn't have struggles and that sometimes doesn't struggle with doubt. I mean, it's something that as you mature in the faith, you should definitely doubt less and less the more that you understand and experience God in your life. But it is something that we all have dealt with before. And so a lot of times it can be during hardship of all sorts that can come our way that maybe that individuals struggle with their faith. You see, and this is so true, emotions will only carry you so far. And then you're going to need something more substantial. Craig here writes, when I speak in churches around the country, I often meet parents who say something like this, quote, if you'd only been here 2 or 3 years ago, our son or daughter had questions about the faith which no one could answer, and now they're far from the Lord. In fact, there seem to be more and more reports of Christians abandoning their faith, and this is true. We see this happening. You might see this, it's called now deconstructing faith. And so there's a lot of, within the last year to two, there's social media influencers and Christian musicians that are declaring, I'm no longer a Christian. I have gone through this process of deconstructing my faith. And so we see stories about this, and we often wonder why. And so we see more and more reports of Christians abandoning the faith. There was a Christian minister at Stanford University reported that 40% of Christian high school students in church youth groups will quit church involvement altogether after graduation. Now, that number, I believe, is actually a lot higher. It's a lot higher. In fact, I've seen studies and reports that say that a lot of our Christian students, that once they get off into college and start getting on their own, it's actually closer to the 80 to 90% that they leave the faith. Now, it's not just that they lose their faith in a hostile university environment. Rather, many have already abandoned the faith, and this is true, and this was the subject of a book I read that was titled Already Gone. By the time they get to college, they've already checked out. They've already checked out. They're just biding their time. They're just living in mom and dad's house, and now that I'm on my own and I can make my own decisions, I've already not bought into this. And so many have already abandoned the faith while still in the youth group but continue to go through the motions until they're out from under the parents' authority. Now, I would say this is true. For the most part, within Christendom as a whole, the church is failing these kids. Rather than provide them training in the defense of Christianity's truth, we focus, and this is not just for young people, this is the church as a whole. We focus on emotional worship experiences, felt needs, and entertainment. And so I think this is what we see in Christendom as a whole, and I think that is absolutely true in entertainment. Now, it's no wonder why they become sitting ducks for that teacher or professor who rationally takes aim at their faith. In high school and college, students are intellectually assaulted with every manner of non-Christian philosophy, conjoined with an overwhelming relativism and skepticism. We've got to train our kids for war, and I agree. And we've got to train ourselves, not just our children. How dare we send them unarmed into an intellectual war zone? Parents must do more than take their children to church and read them Bible stories. Mom and dads need to be trained in apologetics themselves and so be able to explain to their children simply from an early age and with an increasing depth why we believe as we do. Honestly, he writes, I find it hard to understand how Christian couples in our day and age can risk bringing children into the world without being trained in apologetics as part of the art of parenting. I would agree. Now, of course, this doesn't guarantee, you might do everything perfectly and really teach and train. Apologetics won't guarantee that you or your children will keep the faith. There are all kinds of moral and spiritual factors that come into play, and that's going to be the subject of our next, as we move into Lesson 2 tonight, about the many faces and causes of unbelief. And so we're going to see that as we move forward. Now, the third thing, and this is interesting, the study of apologetics is going to make you a deeper and more interesting person. How about that? You take this class, you're going to be deeper and more interesting. You can go tell people, William Lane Craig said so. Yep. Now, this is true. American culture is so appallingly superficial, fixated on celebrities, entertainment, sports, and self-indulgence. See, studying apologetics is going to make you take you beyond all of that to life's deepest questions. Questions about the existence and nature of God, the origin of the universe, the source of moral values, the problem of suffering and evil, and so on. We're going to deal with all these things. As you wrestle with these deep questions, you yourself will be changed. Now, I will agree with that. Because when we can you can turn on the TV and see all that's happening in our world and tell me sometimes it just doesn't, it gets to you. And you might say, why? Why is all this happening? Why is this happening? And so this study and what we're engaging in here gives us the ability to answer the question, why? And so I'm looking forward to doing that when we deal with the problem of evil and suffering. You will become more thoughtful and well-rounded. You learn how to think logically and to analyze what other people are saying. This is extremely important. Because in a day and age when we have no idea what's true and what's not when we turn on the television, it's important for us to be able to logically analyze what we're seeing and say, this adds up or it doesn't add up, or being able to think through things. Today, what we have, unfortunately, is people that are not able to analyze. They're not able to think logically. They just take what is given them, internalize it, and then spew it right back out. And that is the essence of social media. There's very little research that takes place. See, and I've seen things like this. Everybody now is an expert on Middle East affairs, right? Everybody knows all the inner workings of the Afghani issue because they read one article from somebody they like on Facebook. Oh, yes. What language do they speak? Farsi, that's right. Well, I knew that was like in Iran and in Iraq, but in Afghanistan as well? Aha. Yes. Now, so that's what we see. So it gives us the ability to think logically and analytically, and it's extremely important. Now, third reason. Reason number three. Reason number three is this, that apologetics can be very useful in winning unbelievers. And I think this is true, and I think this is important in our day and age, is that we have to be equipped with the ability to communicate the gospel in that cultural backdrop. And this is one of the things that we're going to talk about the further we get into this class. And this really has to do more with tactics and how we share our faith. But we need to understand that people in general are on a continuum of belief. And so on one side, we may have this side that's saying that they are Bible-believing Christians in the New Testament Christianity sense, that they've got it and they're good. They got it. They're where they need to be. And then working our way this way, we may have people that are involved in Christianity, but maybe are in a denomination. So they got some things right, but they got some quite a bit wrong too. And then we keep working our way to agnostic, and then all the way over here to atheist. So we have a continuum of belief. And so we need to identify where people are on that continuum and then be able to deal with them wherever they're at on that. So I think a lot of us assume that everybody has a certain understanding that's over here. They know about the God of the Bible. They know what the Bible is. There's some respect for the Bible. So we kind of operate from that mindset when maybe they've not even seen a Bible. And that's more and more going to become more and more common in our culture as we move forward. So we got to be able to work at any point across the spectrum. And that's what apologetics equips us to do. So when apologetics is persuasively presented and sensitively combined, and so that's really, if you look down here at the verse at the very end, 1 Peter 3:15, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense. So this is that idea that we're able to make a defense. We're able to argue positively for Christianity. We're able to defend it as well. And so we are prepared to do that. But also you see here, to make a defense to everyone who asks you, you give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. And so this is the idea of a persuasive presentation, one that includes logic and analytics and thinking and all the things that are necessary for someone to say, you know what, I am going to put my faith and trust. I'm going to submit my life to this, but also doing so in a sensitive way, one that combines gentleness and reverence. And so when apologetics is persuasively presented and sensitively combined with a gospel presentation and a personal testimony, in fact, that can be important. Now, I would say this, that if your starting point for gospel presentations is your personal testimony, then that can be a little shaky, right? Because if it's just like, well, this works for me, I believe it to be true, and here's what God's done in my life, that can be good, but if that's all we're giving people, then what are they putting their faith in? You and your experience. Now, it can be an important element, but if that's the only bullet in the gun, then a little shaky. So, now apologetics equips us with the necessary tools to reach any person in the current worldview which they hold. It allows Christians to understand and evaluate lost persons of the world and to meet them directly where they are. And so, reason 3, winning believers. The idea there is combined with the gospel presentation. We're equipping ourselves with the necessary tools to reach any person and to meet them directly where they are. Okay, any questions about lesson 1? Did everybody get all the blanks that you need there? Everybody get them all? Any comments or thoughts on the subject matter? Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. Yes. Right. And, absolutely, because that expert might have a certain point of view which they're trying to agenda that they're trying to move. You just don't know. So it's important that these thought processes help us in all sorts of avenues, being able to logically analyze and think for yourself. See, that's the problem today, and the way many of our politicians want to treat us is that we're unable to think for ourselves, so we will think for you. We will tell you what to do, how to do it, and you just and go on, right? I was a sheep, I think. So, but thank you. Yes. Sheeple, right? Be good sheeple. 2A. 2A. The church focused on emotional worship. Focused. And that is true. 3A. Changed. As a person wrestles with these questions, they will be changed. Anybody else? So some of y'all were scared to speak out when I said, did you need any blanks? Anybody else need one? I'm happy to. Okay. So now, let's move on to Lesson 2, the many faces and causes of unbelief. Now, I think this is important. In this, the bulk of our lessons that we're going to be working on, at least for the foreseeable future, are from Apologetics Press. Now, are any of you guys familiar with them? That's an excellent website. In fact, an organization, and it's a Church of Christ affiliated, so it's Apologetics Press. And so they have a lot of great resources. Now, with the one distinction being that they're not instrumental. So, but they have a lot of great writers and thinkers and theologians. Apologetics are on there quite a bit, and so there is a lot of our resources that we're going to be utilizing come from an apologetics section that they have on there. I was very happy to find it, and that's going to form the backbone of where we're going. And I really like their path because discussing and understanding this lesson, the many faces and causes of unbelief, because, again, every individual is coming from a certain specific history and background. And so everybody's a little different. And so if we got to understand where they're coming from, then it may be something, we'll talk about this as we go through, it may be something that is intellectual in nature, that they have studied it and they don't buy it intellectually. Or it may be something volitional in nature. Yeah, I see that, that's legit, but I'm not going to change the way I live. They're two very different things. And so there's all sorts of different combinations of this, or one that we're going to come to. I've suffered terrible tragedies in my life I can't even begin to tell you. Somebody might say. And what I've been through and what I've seen, there's no way there's a God. Maybe something like that. And so we're going to talk about the many faces and causes of unbelief. Why do so many obviously intelligent people prefer to believe that there is no God? Humanity prides itself on its freedom of choice, right? Glenn? Shame. Yeah, no problem. He's like, uh-oh, there's another one? There you go, sir. Anybody else need one? Now that Glenn has spoken up? All right. Everybody good? Okay, so the first blank there, Glenn, was intelligent. Why do so many obviously intelligent people prefer to believe that there is no God? Now, humanity prides itself on its freedom of choice. Human beings are free moral agents who have been given the right to make their own decisions. Well, each person decides what he wants to hear, what he wants to eat, and then where he wants to go. But most important, each person decides what he or she wants to believe. A speech given by the Old Testament character Joshua, you guys should be familiar with this, allows us to see just how free each one of us is to choose if we want to believe in God. Speaking to the Jewish nation thousands of years ago, Joshua said, quote, "And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Chapter 24, verse 15. See, Joshua's point could not have been any clearer. The Jews, just like every other nation and all individual people, had the freedom of choice to believe or not believe in God. Freedom, however, always comes with responsibility. Freedom always comes with responsibility. With freedom of choice comes the responsibility to think carefully, choose wisely, and act forcefully. Therefore, it is the responsibility of every human being to recognize, believe, and obey the truth. See, if we think about that, is that statement limited just to a Christian worldview? Yes. That is true. Now let's think about this too. So if it is, freedom comes with responsibility. With freedom of choice comes a responsibility to think carefully, choose wisely, and act forcefully. It is a responsibility of every human being to recognize, believe, and obey the truth. So, we are understanding this from a Christian worldview because we believe that to be the truth. And it is the truth. Okay? It is the truth. But if there was some other, if this wasn't true and something else was true, then we'd be responsible to obey that. If there was some other reality that wasn't Christianity. We know, I use the word know, that this is the reality. But if there was something else, then we'd be responsible for going that route, to be honest to that truth. And when I say that truth, it's one. There's only one. We're going to talk about this too, logically speaking. There can only be one truth, right? You can't have multiple truths about the same thing. Law of non-contradiction. So if I were to, I'm going to pull something obvious. Okay. Piece of paper, right? So if I were to say this was a piece of paper, and Kelly was to say, no, that's an orange, then we would understand that, yes. Well, that may be true even outside of the statement. So, okay. Now, one of us can be right. We both can be wrong. But we both can't be right. Now, in our society today, we're forced by postmodern thought and what's out there today to say, well, you're both correct. If she thinks it's an orange, it's an orange. Have a bite. And so when we talk about that, we talk about the logically speaking and so forth. So we do understand from a Christian worldview, and this is what we're going to establish and understand better, that one truth that exists is the fact that the God of the Bible is the one true God and that there is not another reality or truth out there. So let's talk about faces of unbelief. Throughout history, many people have decided not to believe in God. They have gone through, by many different names: atheists, free thinkers, agnostics, infidels, etc. In this section, we will look at specific types of unbelievers. So these are generic categories that someone might say this is who they are. Now, recognize that many times when somebody says they place themselves in one of these categories, we still have to kind of make sure that that's where they're really at. Because a lot of times someone will say they're an atheist and what they really are is an agnostic. And so we need to understand these categories of unbelief. So the first one is atheists. Now the word atheism means, now go to your etymology, we've talked about this before. A in front of something means, it negates it, so it means without. So it means without God. Right? The atheist is the person who says that there is no God. Now the late Carl Sagan, he's a famous atheist, and he had a television series that was I want to say it was in the 80s when it came out. And he said, he summed up atheism when he declared the cosmos, right, is all that is or ever was or ever will be. So what's he saying in that statement? Okay, there's no creator. Yes. What else? Okay, so yes, so he would have been looking at things from the universe being eternal in nature. Okay, so what you see is what you get. Everything is material, right? Everything is material. And so one of the ways that I really like that helps us to understand this is this idea of a closed system or an open system. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, if we have a box, right? This is a closed system, materialism, that says that all that there is the box itself, is material. The stuff, everything in the universe, we could say we could fit in that box, and that's all that ever was, all that ever will be, and all that is that which is in the box. Open system, we say, is that there's something outside the box, and that is, so we would call what was here natural, right? But then we would say in an open system there's supernatural, meaning outside of, greater than. And so we would say that there's supernatural. Sagan would say, nope, closed system, and all that it is the box, the material, and that's all there ever was, and that's all that will ever be. Now, an atheist is one who plainly states that God does not exist. Now, however, it's much easier for someone to call himself an atheist than it is for him to defend such a position. And this is true. In order to know that there is no God, now this is interesting. A person would have to know every single fact in the universe. Because the one fact that he did not know might be the fact that God exists. So for someone to know that God does not exist, then they would need to know every single fact of existence. Now, how many of us were present at the beginning of the universe? How many human beings? Oh. That ain't right. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, there you go. Whatever you were giving him, I'll take it. All right, so shame on you. What were we talking about? Yeah, was anybody here at the beginning? Yeah. You be quiet. All right, so was any human being present at the beginning of all things? So, by its very nature, there is no one who can empirically know how things began. When I say empirically, that means that having observed it, right? You could observe a chicken egg hatching, right? You could observe that, study it, understand it, go back to, you could figure those things you could observe. But as far as the beginning, so everybody has to employ a certain method in understanding what happened and what didn't happen. And so, for an atheist to use the word know, that there is no God, they would need to know every single fact, including how things got started through observation. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, for instance, talking about this idea of having every single fact. If a person had a unique blue striped shirt, he cannot prove that no other shirt in the world was like it unless, what? Unless he had every other shirt in the world to examine. Now, the atheist cannot prove that God does not exist because he cannot possibly know every other fact there is to know, any more than a man with a blue striped shirt can see every other shirt that exists. The actual truth of the matter is this, is that most atheists do not deal with facts at all. Most. They are so set against the idea of God that they dismiss or ignore the evidence that proves his existence. Now, when we use the word prove, right, where's another place that we use the word prove without empirically knowing? Okay, yes. Let me rephrase my question. In our everyday lives, there's a place where we use the word prove, and in that that word is used, proof is used, and it's in place of empirical knowledge. And so it's a little tricky what my question is. Yeah, okay, in a courtroom, right? Lawyer gets up and says, I'm going to prove to you that the defendant was guilty, that he committed this murder. So it can be proven without being empirically known, right? So now there's different ways that we could talk about this. And so this is going to be the essence of our next lesson after this, is about the relationship of faith and knowledge. Because when we understand, see, what we don't recognize or what we don't admit is that the judicial system is based upon faith. Now, would we ever use those words? We don't associate faith with that, right? But have people been sent to their deaths based on a preponderance of the evidence of conclusions that were gathered from the evidence? Has that happened in judicial systems? Yes. And that is so, and what we fail to recognize, we're going to talk about this a lot more. I shouldn't jump the gun here, but prove is a good word. And so, in relationship to faith. And so the actual truth of the matter is that most atheists do not deal with facts at all. They are so set against the idea of God that they dismiss or ignore the evidence that proves his existence. The late Isaac Asimov, another famous atheist, once said, emotionally, I am an atheist. I don't have the evidence to prove that God doesn't exist, but I'm so strongly suspect he doesn't that I don't waste my time, or I don't want to waste my time. End quote. Atheism does not answer the evidence for God's existence and cannot offer a reasonable alternative for belief in him. So that would be atheists. Okay? Theists, we hear the word theos there, for God, without God. So let's talk about agnostics now. Okay. Proof. Atheism is impossible to prove. Anybody else need any? No problem. Okay, agnostics. All right, so let's figure this out. The word agnostic, so we know means Without. And so what word do you hear there on the second part? You hear Gnostic. That's from the Greek word gnosis, which means, knowledge, to know. So it means without knowledge. Very good. You guys are on the ball. The word agnostic means without knowledge. Now, someone says, I'm an agnostic, means without knowledge. Are they saying, I'm dumb? No. So we need to understand, what does this mean? So the agnostic does not boldly proclaim that God does not exist, as the atheist would. Instead, he suggests no one can know whether or not God exists because there's simply not enough evidence upon which to base a conclusion. So in order to know that there is no God, I'm sorry. I backed up too far in the other notes here. So, there's not enough evidence upon which to base a conclusion. In essence, then, agnosticism says, I don't know, you don't know, nobody knows, and nobody can know if there is a God. Agnostics frequently point out that man cannot know everything, and that he has never been able to detect God with his limited mind and capabilities. Thus, the agnostic suggests people should just quit searching. What the agnostic fails to realize, however, is that this concept must work both directions. That is to say, man must be unable to reach up to God, and God must be unable to reach down to man. So they're saying that as well. But God is not able to reach man, for he is not limited by the same constraints in time and knowledge as humans. An infinite God could make himself known to us at any time he wanted, and there is nothing to prevent him from doing so. Furthermore, there is good evidence that he has done exactly that. The agnostic's claim of I can't know really is a mask that he puts on to hide the fact that he realizes that there is ample evidence that he can neither explain away nor disprove to establish the existence of God. Perhaps the agnostic cannot find God for the same reason a thief cannot find the police. Perhaps the agnostic cannot find God for the same reason a thief cannot find a policeman. Interesting thought. So, then we move on to the skeptic. Now, the skeptic is the person who doubts that there is a God. The Standard Dictionary definition is quite revealing when it describes a skeptic as one who holds to, quote, the doctrine that true knowledge or knowledge in a particular area is uncertain and who has doubts concerning basic religious principles. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what happens in philosophical circles is they deal with this idea of certainty. And so when it comes to knowledge, and so there's a whole branch of philosophy that's called epistemology, and it basically is, how do we know what we know? And so some people really get bogged down in this stuff, and they say, a lot of them end up in this, that there's no way to be 100% certain of what we know. Because they throw ideas out like this. What we're experiencing now is a shared illusion among all people. Is that we're all existing in a simulation of sorts. And so they head down these crazy roads. And so now how this idea fleshes out as it trickles down till it gets to the point of the regular folk who's not, really digging into all the philosophical realms, is it's basically this. We can't know for sure 100%, therefore it can't be real or trusted. And that's where, so if it's 99.9999, but if there's the slightest chance of uncertainty that can enter, then it can't be true. And so, that's how a lot of this stuff works sometimes on this level. Now, you're probably not going to run into too many people that, unless you get into some academic discussions and things like this, we're going to deal with that very much. But so that's kind of where the idea of the skeptic lands. Notice that the skeptic does not claim knowledge of God as unattainable, as the agnostic does, but rather is uncertain. The skeptic is not prepared to accept anything except that which can be verified empirically. And empirically, when we say something can be verified empirically, that is to say by using the five senses. Right? To the skeptic then, science becomes the only valid method of proving anything. So if you can't test it according to science and the scientific method, then you cannot know it. Since God cannot be seen or tasted or heard or touched or smelled, then skeptics say either he does not exist or that he cannot be very important even if he does. So what's wrong with this position? Someone that says that everything has to be empirically verified for it to be real. What's that? What word? This? Okay. I think that's obvious, but let's, yep. So that is true. They obviously have problems with this. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Go ahead. You drop it? Okay. Okay. What about it? All right. Okay, you can't see it. Okay. So, but scientifically, could it be proven? Probably we could say, let's think on some, you're on the right track, but let's bring it to a different. Is love real? Are emotions real? Can you scientifically, empirically prove love? What about personhood itself? Yeah. See, the skeptic position is faulty because even he knows some things exist that cannot be verified by the scientific method. Science will never be able to observe or explain such concepts of love or hate or sorrow or joy. Science will never be able to explain why a man in a foxhole during a war throws himself on a hand grenade to save his fellow soldiers. The sad part is that the skeptic has paid a high price for his skepticism, the rejection and abandonment of some of the human race's most important and cherished concepts. Why? In order to be able to say, I doubt that God exists. So the skeptic is the person who doubts, and then point one, the skeptic is not prepared to accept anything except that which can be verified empirically. Now, what about now, I didn't include this one in your notes, but this concept of the infidel. Now, that word a lot of times associated with what? Yeah, we have Muslims who use the word infidel. Yeah. The infidel is the person who not only refuses to believe in God himself, but also is intolerant of and actively opposes those who do. The infidel speaks out against God and does all he can to condemn religion. The infidel despises God and the Bible and anyone who believes in either. I'm a little reluctant to use that word just because it's been attached so much to Islam. But so you could almost say there's such a thing as the infidel agnostic, the infidel atheist. Well, I think that expresses itself in a lot of ways in our culture today, yes. Are those that are hostile to any other thought system outside of where they're at. And I tell you what, I think this is just going to be a good spot to break here before we get into the causes of unbelief. And then we can start. So these are just general categories. But the question then becomes that we're going to look at is, well, what drove a person to, how did they get to the point where they would say that they're an atheist? And there may be 112 different roads to that, right? A combination of these causes of unbelief. There can be a lot of reasons that may get a person in their own mind to that point. And so if we understand these broad categories and then we understand the roads that get people there, then maybe we can help people, we can understand where they're really at and help them to deal with what they're dealing with. And when we get a chance to share with them, to teach. And so, like I said, we're going to look at these different things. And there's a lot of different reasons that we're going to talk about, and I want us to spend a good amount of time on these because I think these are important. All right, any questions or comments about anything we've got covered so far? Did everybody get all the blanks they needed?